Welcome to another episode of our personal empowerment audio program, Finding Yourself in Paradise. Hi, I'm Michael Benner.
And I'm Steve Snyder, and we're talking about the topic for today's show. We decided to do this one simply because it feels so good. This is a topic that fits really well with the theme of finding yourself in paradise, because one of the things you find when you do find yourself in paradise is today's topic, the concept of pleasure.
Pleasure speaks directly to motive and I think even identity, but let's take first things first. By motive, I mean what gets you going, what gets you out of bed in the morning, but the promise of some kind of pleasure. Now, there are similar words like contentment or satisfaction. There's a sense of accomplishment, of moving forward. Even success and victory are wonderful experiences that are certainly related to pleasure. But I think one of the things that makes pleasure most interesting among these terms is that it spills over into both a physical experience and an emotional experience. We have physical pleasure. Somebody scratches your back or rubs your back. I remember my mother, when I was a little boy, would rub my back at night. If I had a problem going to sleep, boy, I just loved that, man. I never felt so safe. And even draw on that memory and that experience now when I want to feel really safe. It's a physical pleasure, but along with that came an emotional pleasure, a sense of comfort, again, that I'm safe and feeling reassured. Is there such a thing as a mental pleasure? Well, I'm not sure, but to me, it's interesting that we can experience both a physical and an emotional. A victory or accomplishment or satisfaction, some of these are more judgments or ideas, mental goals, than any real feeling that you experience in your body or in your heart.
Yeah, I think there is pleasure that comes with a puzzle solved or a problem solved or, something figured out. But it's interesting because pleasure certainly is an emotional quality, but it has both physical, emotional, and mental stimulus that cause it, to be engaged, to cause it to be felt. And it's subjective. I mean, the same thing doesn't trigger everybody. The same experience makes one person experience pleasure, another person is uncomfortable with that same experience. So it's not like this thing is always pleasurable. Public speaking for me is very pleasurable, and for other people it's terrifying. So roller coasters for some people are extraordinarily pleasurable, and for other people they wouldn't do it no matter how much you paid them. So it's definitely something we experience ourselves. But what is pleasure? To me, it's an emotional experience of allowing yourself to feel better than you usually do. It's compared to how you usually feel. I mean, it's not compared to how you felt when you were feeling your worst. It's compared to how you normally feel. And if you're feeling, for some reason, you're feeling better than that, then you'd call that pleasure. Now, that's real significant because, you see, that's the main thing the brain is looking for. I mean, the brain is looking to move away from those things that cause pain and move toward those things that cause pleasure. So anything that causes pleasure becomes kind of like a magnet to your mind. It becomes the kinds of things your mind, I seek that, I search for that thing that causes me pleasure. Now, depending upon your mindset, different things cause you pleasure. For example, there was a great book called Mindset that I read recently where Carol Dweck, I think is her name, she talks about how one mindset is if you face a situation and you fail at it, then you think it's a bad thing, you don't want to do it anymore, and you avoid it from now on. You go do things you're good at. But the other mindset is if you find something you fail at, it really intrigues you. It really like, wow, that's interesting. I'm challenged by that. I really want to learn more and I want to grow. And some people, it's not really optimism or pessimism, because some people, when they are in the things they feel good at, they're very optimistic. But when they face failure, they think that's where I'm not supposed to go. And other people, when they face failure, that's where I am supposed to go. So pleasure to one person is finding something they're good at already and doing that, and pleasure to another person is finding something that they aren't good at and learning how to be better at that instead.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to talk about the pursuit of pleasure as resulting from, on a more primal level, the avoidance of pain. That's sort of Maslow, right? The idea that one of the basic drives is avoiding pain. We can see this in problem solving. Lots of times we get too stressed to really know what we want. We're not quite sure what to do about it, and so we leap and take some action, which is just change any direction, just to get off of dead center. I don't know what I want. I just am trying to avoid what I don't want.
Feeling so stressed, you often make bad decisions and careless mistakes.
And forgetting that that's not really a goal. Imagine a whole lifestyle of avoiding what I don't want. And people say, well, what do you do for a living? Or what are your dreams? Or what would you like to do with the middle third of your life or the next decade? You know, you hit those 3-0 birthday, the 4-0 birthday, the 5-0 birthday, and you reassess and you do your 10-year plan, and oh my goodness. And for a lot of folks, their whole life is just trying to put out fires, just solve the problems at hand. They never really pull it together. Seems to me, and this is part of this discussion today of pleasure, if we could give up the idea of getting rid of all of our problems and getting to a place where there are no problems that I can't write a check to make go away or call somebody I know on the phone and make it disappear. If I could somehow get to that place, what I'm arguing is if we could give up that belief that there is such a place as no problems, you have enough money, you know the right people, you have the power, and get real and understand that everybody's got problems, nobody's ever gotten to that place, and desire instead to be better problem solvers, I think then we can allow more room in our lives for the simple pleasures of the moment. But this idea, if instead you're always behind and always running as fast as you can just to stay exactly where you are, gosh, where's the opportunity for real pleasure?
Where's the opportunity to stop and smell the roses? A hackneyed phrase, but it's like so appropriate. And that's what we're talking about, because pleasure's everywhere if you stop and have some. You know, it's like the world's a banquet. You know, stop and have some pleasure of this. And so you can find pleasure in virtually everything nature has ever done. You know, virtually every sky, virtually every tree of ever. You can find pleasure in a whole bunch of your memories, not all of them, mind you, but a whole bunch of your memories. You can find pleasure in virtually all of your fantasies. You can find pleasure, you can create pleasure in the joy of being here now, doing nothing but being here now. It's not as if you have to really work hard to seek pleasure. What you do have to do, though, is slow down and let it in. You know, slow down and put your mind on it. Slow down. It takes focus. Passion, not just the idea that there's things out there that are good. It's that you've got to become aware of them. You've got to focus on them. You've got to create your own pleasure. And why do that is so that that's where the brain wants to go. If most of what your brain is getting is stuff about worry and negative thoughts and feelings and anxiety and fear, if that's most of what your brain is getting, then that's what it thinks you want. That's what it thinks you're telling it to go for. That's what it thinks it's supposed to be thinking about. That's what you're thinking about. So what you need to do is at least counterbalance all that worry, all that anxiety, all those negative thoughts and feelings you have with the other side of the coin, which simply is pleasure. What is pleasure? Anything. You know, anything you choose to become interested in. You can become interested in anything. There's nothing interesting. There are people that are interested. You can choose to create some kind of a passion, some kind of a interest, some kind of something that makes you really excited in your life. And I think that's one of the challenges we want to talk about in this show is how to bring more pleasure into your life. Well, find something that really feels good and do it. Maybe do it for moments. Maybe do it sometimes for minutes. Maybe once in a while you have more than minutes to do it with. But bring something that brings you like an instant jolt of pleasure into your life on a regular basis. It's easy to do. It's creating a lifestyle of stopping and smelling the roses.
You know, I heard a junkie on a TV news program say one day that getting high is a real misleading term. He said, because you're not really feeling better. You get high to feel nothing.
To not feel bad, yeah.
Yeah. And I thought, well, that's a pretty low standard and odd use of the term. And so, again, this is not just avoiding what you don't want. This is moving toward what you do. This is not just avoiding pain and suffering and calling that pleasure. We're talking about the peak experience of pleasure, of dedicating yourself to the extent that you're willing to really come into the moment. It means you have to let go of the past and its worries and regrets and resentments, let go of the fears of the future. And even if there are times to learn from the past or to plan the future, that makes sense, but do it here in the now, where you're paying attention, where you're focused on creating that pleasure. And then you're going to have to face the part of you that's uncomfortable when you sit with pleasure, the part of you that feels, well, for me, Steve, it's like unproductive, or you don't deserve just to sit here and enjoy this. You've got things to do. There's places to go. There's stuff to be done. My goodness, if you forgot about all these things on your to-do list, and suddenly there's a challenge to my simple comfort and pleasure, and I got to go, 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 go. I think this is why a lot of people find TV addicting, because it's close to sitting quietly, just enjoying the moment. The downside is you have all of this programming coming in that the subconscious mind experiences as real. So you end up getting stressed nevertheless. It's sort of a hidden message. You really are. This news is happening to you. You're really going to be suffering the effects of the stress from the world condition just by virtue of watching it, knowing about it, obsessing on it with the television.
And there's something, historical about authorities telling us to not experience pleasure. I mean, this goes back, well, at least as far back as religion, where they wanted you to devote all of your attention to, devoted to God or whatever it was, and so therefore any pleasure would be a way away from that. So, all the religions that said you can't enjoy things, you can't dance, you can't play, you can't have sex, or all those things you're not supposed to do that feel good, were so that you wouldn't do those pleasurable things and therefore not have the time to be devoted to, But those things that, we call pleasure, that we call now guilty pleasure, those pleasures we do have that we don't publicly share, that we do those things that make us feel good behind closed doors because there's some guilt involved, that holds us back from experiencing all the pleasure we can. So whether it's, guilty thoughts or non-lethal, non-violent, non-hurtful guilty actions that are just, we're two consenting people that both, or one consenting person that just wants to feel good and no harm done to any other human being. Well, theoretically, anything you want to do that makes you feel good, that doesn't hurt anybody else, that it makes you feel better, is a good thing. It's just, we've got these social mores that say these are okay, but all of these are not.
This is important material here, this whole idea of the church or any other institution or agency that intends to express a sense of authority over people. It's going to begin to think increasingly in absolutes, or maybe just jump right to the idea that all truth is absolute and there are no relative truths. It's an either-or, it's a good thing or a bad thing, and if it's anything in the middle, it's a bad thing, right?
Pretty much.
And we're going to tell you what's right and wrong. And, we can put this on the church, but it's actually a human trait to want to control other people through fear. It's just a much easier way of managing people. There's a much more effective way, which is called motivating people with love and vision, making an example of yourself, treating others as you'd like to be treated. But, that takes a little more effort. That requires some...
Or a lot more effort.
Attention. Well, okay. But there are cases where it could just take a little more effort and people don't seem to want to do it just because of our conditioning. We don't like to change. We're all Pavlov's dog in some way. So you could easily argue that some part of us even likes to be controlled, likes as if little children to be told what to do. But to think of these dichotomies as absolutes is to make the mistake of failing to recognize, especially in a free society, think of it as a democracy, a republic, a libertarian society, whatever your idea of freedom, it's got to be the right to find some middle permutation or combination of your sense of what's right and wrong, your sense of what's good and bad, and your sense of what's pleasurable and what's not pleasurable. The government so often legislates morality, it gets caught up just like the church in telling people what kind of behavior is right and wrong. A victimless crime is a great example. whether it's gambling or prostitution or use of harmless substances, non-toxic, non-addicting marijuana, for example, even has medicinal value, and we're still suffering from this reefer madness left over from the 1930s. So I think it's believing only in absolute truths that gets us in trouble. I'll concede that it's likely there may be, in some situations, such a thing as an absolute truth, if I can get in return an agreement that in most cases truth is relative or subjective, and we've got to allow each other to be free enough to find your personal truth, even if it is not exactly the same as mine, and your sense of pleasure, even if I find it a little bit offensive or uncomfortable or whatever. That's part of what it takes to live in a free society.
So what we're suggesting is there's real good reason to seek pleasure, to find more of it in your life. And if it's only to counterbalance all the negativity that's being blasted at us from every direction. The world's a very safe place. The message that we get from the media is the world's a very dangerous, overwhelming place. But even though it is a very safe place, it's also a very confusing place because more stuff's happening now than ever happened before. So the mind is filled with lots of stuff. And one of the things it does when it gets filled with lots of stuff is it thinks it needs to handle all that stuff. And the more busy the mind gets, the less time that it has to seek pleasure. So seeking pleasure doesn't take long. It can happen in a moment, a matter of very few seconds. Seeking pleasure can be something that takes minutes or theoretically sometimes hours and hours of joy, but it must be sought. It won't be found in the day-to-day hustle and bustle. It won't be found in the rat race. It'll be found in the space between things. It'll be found in the space between events and between appointments and between things you're doing, and it'll be found even more significantly in the place between your thoughts. When you find that your thoughts slow down enough so that there's some space between them, that's where some of the greatest pleasure comes from. So seek pleasure. You can seek it in the past with your greatest memories. You can seek it in the future with your greatest fantasies. You can seek it in your body with remembering things that felt good physically and things that, emotional moments that felt wonderful emotionally, and those puzzles you've solved or those problems you've figured out. Remember how great that felt, the accomplishments you've had. You can seek pleasure in the real world, in the now. You can seek pleasure in the past or in the future. It's easy to find. It's everywhere. It's just a matter of fill your mind with some of it because it needs to counterbalance all the rest of it.
So is it a primary motive? Is it a reason to get up in the morning and go about your life? You know, I think it really is, especially if we expand the scope and talk about pleasure as we would happiness and love, and understand that these are all qualities of love ultimately, and ought to be primary to our motives, to our reason to be. The pursuit of happiness is a natural and normal thing. That's a good thing. That's the carrot and the stick of the way the universe seems to work, at least psychologically and spiritually, to aspire toward goodness. We've got something innate in us, gang. It's pretty clear that in spite of whatever darkness or shadow may also be in there, there's this longing to be better. And you might argue that the pursuit of happiness is way too oriented towards self-interest for people to aspire to serve others, to be a member of the community. But we argue that there's a higher self. You see, that the nature of self evolves in the pursuit of love and its qualities such as pleasure. You begin to understand by studying pleasure, if you will, as a quality of love, that there's a greater pleasure than the pleasure of the separated self, and that's to share your pleasure with other people. And that's one of the ways that we refer to this higher self, a self that is not separated, but has a harmonious relationship with others. So much of life is missed by so many people because they don't get the importance of relationships. Relationships is everything. I'm talking mostly about your relationship with other people, but it includes, of course, your relationship with nature, with the trees and the forests and the prairies and the ocean, and, of course, the animals on all the plants and the flowers. But your relationship with people is so important to everything else in your life. Why you do family, why you do business, why you're interested in this goal as opposed to that particular goal, why your priorities are this way or that way. So much of it is this pursuit of happiness that is natural. It's not selfish. It evolves all by itself, naturally and normally, toward a greater good in a sense of I'm totally interconnected with all that is.
It's really important, I think, to understand what Thomas Jefferson meant when he said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Because, some people think the word pursuit means like a cop car chasing another car, or a guy with a net chasing after a butterfly, like chasing after. Pursuit did not mean chasing after. Pursuit meant practicing to mastery. You pursue something like you pursue the martial arts, or you pursue yoga, or you pursue meditation. You pursue something like this is an art form that I'm practicing regularly and mastering. And that's what pursuit of happiness meant in Jefferson's mind. That we all have the right to be alive. Nobody has the right to kill us. We have the right to be free. Nobody has the right to enslave us. And we have the right to practice happiness as our lifestyle, to live as happy, and to have pleasure as to be part of what we do. And Jefferson talked about pleasure coming from reading and learning. Jefferson talked about pleasure from like digging in the land and growing things. He talked about pleasure that came from architecturally designing and building things and creating ideas like universities. Jefferson, a great hero of mine, found pleasure in a lot of things, but he talked about pleasure being not only something that you could imagine, but something that you have every single right to experience and to pursue.
Before we leave the idea, Steve, of institutions like the church, and we talked about the government as well, any agency that expresses authority, wanting to control us with the idea of absolutes and mitigating pleasure, not wanting you to feel too happy, understanding you're easier to control if you're not too content, if you're not feeling too good. People that study such things can understand how these institutions often set groups of people against other groups of people and promote disharmony for this very reason, a kind of a divide and conquer philosophy that you can see again in all institutions by the very nature of the institution. I'd like to remind us how primitive this is and how far back it goes, because Pythagoras said the number 2 was evil and should be suppressed because it was not the number 1. In other words, if we're going to apply numbers to symbols, certainly God has to be number 1. He's number 1. He's top drawer. He's the big honcho, right? Well, anything other than God would then be what? Where do you go from number 1? Well, you have to go to number 2. These are the absolutes, the polarities, the ultimate spirit and matter, God and man, heaven and earth polarities that we think about in terms, again, of absolutes. So we can see where somebody who believes in absolutes takes this so literally that, again, dancing or a beautiful romantic embrace or even wild sex and drugs, whatever, is abhorrent to God, that God does not want you to have any physical pleasure, that sexual relations, for example, should only be for procreation, and you better not enjoy yourself, by the way, monkey. Where would that crazy idea come from? Then even today, society is so repressed sexually, especially in the West, so sexually repressed. Always turns out it's the people that are against the more liberal views of sexuality or homosexuality or gay marriage that turn out to be the closeted gays. Their conservative positions against a sexually liberated community comes from their own repression, their own shame and their own guilt that they wouldn't have if it weren't for this institutional, organized idea that there's only 2 ways anything can be. And if you're of the flesh, if you enjoy the pleasures of food, again, it's always exaggerated. Gluttony, I'll acknowledge, you can go over the top with pleasure. You can be vulgar with pleasure. You can be slothful. You can be lazy. You can be careless with pleasure. But that would be this lower polarity we talk about, the egoic self or the persona that continues to think of itself as separated. I think there's plenty of research and plenty of different interrelated fields that shows that consciousness evolves, the conscience evolves. And as we pursue pleasure as a quality of love, real love and contentment and just the idea of being on track, doing the right thing and feeling good about yourself, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy that takes us in positive directions, and that self evolves from a separative, selfish self to a much more harmonious and unitive self.
And you can find pleasure everywhere, including in your pain. In fact, one of the greatest places to find your pleasure is to face something that you're afraid of, face some memory that was embarrassing or some memory that you haven't healed yet, and face it, breathe into it, release it, and you get not only the pleasure that comes from knowing that you've released it, but the actual physical endorphins that come from releasing that negativity, from that thing that held on to you, and now you let go of it. You can find pleasure wherever you look, if you look. And I think that's sort of the point here, that most people get so caught up in their lives, they get so busy, they stop looking for pleasure, or they feel like there's some guilty, immoral thing to feeling too much pleasure. Yeah, it can be over the top. You can take anything and do too much of it, but you can also take anything and do too little of it, except for the things that you shouldn't be doing at all. Those things that you can be doing that could bring you greater pleasure. And again, you can find those things everywhere you look. I find them in smells and in tastes and in touches, in sensations, in tactile sensations, because that's what I've been sort of paying attention to lately. I've been sort of trying to grow my mind in that direction. I've always been really big on the visual and seeing stuff and hearing stuff, but I've been trying to pay more attention to the way it feels in my body and getting more pleasure from how it feels to walk and how it feels to breathe the air and how it feels inside my body to dance. That there's places to find pleasure in places that you haven't explored much. There's places to find pleasure in the old and familiar. But the mind will go where it predominantly is focused. And if you're predominantly focused on what you're worried about, if you're predominantly focused on the problems that you have rather than the solutions, then you predominantly will move in that direction. But if you can balance that out with some pleasure, with some positive thoughts and feelings and sensations, both physical, emotional, and mental. Pay attention to those experiences that feel the best in your life. I always remember how to feel great every time I get in my shower. I love my shower. I've got this outdoor shower on the ocean, and the wind is blowing, and it's surrounded by wonderful smelling gardenias, and it's an incredible outdoor shower, and it's so pleasurable to feel the counterbalance of the cool wind on my body and the hot water coming down on my it's an incredible pleasure, and I give myself that pleasure every single day. You can find pleasure in your life. You can bring pleasure into your life. You can create interest in anything you wish. But again, it has to be a conscious choice. It has to be a pursuit. It's got to be a practice that you make. It's not something that you hope to stumble upon. You'll stumble upon a little bit of pleasure, but boy, you could find a great deal more.
And so now we really are talking about finding yourself in this paradise, this whole idea. Well, for me, it's the epiphany of a lifetime that I had 15 or 20 years ago. Just a simple thought that came over me in meditation. It was sort of a, hey, Michael, yeah? It's me, Michael, the smarter guy in you. And what if the best parts of you were hidden where you're most afraid to look? And I've been fixated and obsessing on that idea ever since. The best in me in the places I'm most afraid to look. Well, that's an invitation to face your fear. This is Robert Frost. You take the road least traveled, how did he say it? When you explore yourself, if you come to a crossroads, go to the area that's most frightening. Call your bluff. If you really think that something about you is fundamentally bad or inadequate, that you really deserve to be humiliated, that there's a reason people don't want to be around you. If you have these fears, and everybody does at some point in their lives, but you don't have to carry them for your entire life. You could call your bluff. You could go into that cave, slay the dragon, and go into the lair and go deeper and deeper into the darkness. All the light you need to go in there, you carry within yourself. You are the light. And go deeper into the darkness, into what you don't know about yourself, deeper into the fear that you really might be bad or wrong or inadequate. All of this has to be done in a nice, we call it paradise thinking, relaxed, contemplative, safe level of mind. Doesn't matter much if you do all of this while you're driving the car or having a conversation or reading the newspaper or 6 or 8 other things. But in a nice focused place, you keep following that fear deeper and deeper, and magically, alchemically, you get the aha, the insight. It dawns upon you, not through logic or reasoning, but intuitively just bursts upon your awareness. Your emotions expose themselves, reveal themselves, rolling around at your feet, saying, "This is what I've been trying to tell you all along." And you're filled with this burst of love and light and peace and self-forgiveness. And to me, that's one way of experiencing pleasure. That when you talk about facing your fear as a way to find pleasure, seems counterintuitive, but you're spot on. That is finding yourself in paradise.
Yeah, there's really 3 universes I think you can find pleasure in. This 3-dimensional universe we live in right now, we find pleasure in nature, and we find pleasure in our physical sensations and in what we actually see and hear and smell. And there's ways of finding pleasure in this universe. And then there's finding pleasure in the 4th-dimensional universe, in the past and the future, in your memories and in your fantasies. You can find pleasure in not here and now, but in a 4th dimension of time, going back, forward, and forward. And you can find pleasure in the non-dimensional universe of paradise, where you create an imaginary world, you create whatever it is you want. You can find pleasure in things that never have been, never could be. You can create anything you want in your own imaginary peaceful place, in your own imaginary paradise. So no excuses, I can't find pleasure. You can find it in any one of those universes, the one that's existing here, the one that exists in the past or the future, or the one that exists just being born out of your imagination right now. Lots of ways of finding pleasure, lots of ways of pursuing pleasure. It's just a matter of deciding that pleasure is worth pursuing and making the priority to take some time in your life to stop, put down all the stuff, put down all the details, put down all the appointments and meetings and things, and take a moment, smell the roses, hear the symphony, see the beauty, experience the joy that comes from allowing yourself to pursue great pleasure.
And one final idea as we prepare to go to our audio journey, to go into paradise, to access and develop that higher self. Whether it's pleasure we pursue or anything else, remember the axiom of essentially the seed thought of giving away the very thing you wish to receive. I mean, let's say you want somebody to rub your back to make you feel safe. There's a couple of ways you could do that. The most obvious is you could try to find somebody to do that for you, since it's sort of hard to get your own hand around there, to rub your own back. Even if you could, it wouldn't be quite the same. So you could ask somebody or tell somebody, you could pay somebody, or you could find a partner, a friend, a spouse, ideally, and rub their back and just not say anything. And what that does, of course, is engender a relationship where you give away what it is you wish to receive. And the reason that it works in interpersonal relationships is because it's a law of nature. It's the thought as a seed, the intention and the deed that grows and manifests, that flowers, it gets pollinated, and that eventually bears the fruit. So always remind yourself with a breath and a letting go, I'd like to give this away as a way of getting it. I'd like to give pleasure as a way of receiving it, to create a space For me to be in the now and appreciate the pleasure is to first give it away. I mean, when two or more people are enjoying a pleasurable experience, you're having that experience as a group more than as an individual. And if you pulled back and had only the individual's experience of the pleasure, you'd be missing something, right? So there is such a thing as sitting alone and enjoying the pleasantries of the moment. Sitting alone, watching the sun go down, sitting alone, watching the fireplace. But if there's not another person there, then there's something missing. And so I just want to underscore here the whole idea of sharing and of giving and the extra pleasure, I guess, the amplification of the whole experience we call pleasure as a quality of love. It requires a relationship.
Yeah, it does. And it means basically putting the relationship sometimes above the individual. And that's a higher quality of love. And I think, for people who have difficulty with the idea of accepting more pleasure in their lives, people, for example, who are very pessimistic about life, then let me suggest that you can still have that. You can still have your pessimism. You can still have room for being a devil's advocate to everything that comes along. But in addition, it's only healthy to add some cautious optimism, to add some pleasurable thoughts, some ideas that what would it be like if things did work out? Or how could I make the best of things so they don't work out as badly as I fear they will? Some positive, pleasurable thoughts to help balance the negativity. It's just healthy. It's just logical and rational. I'm not saying give up negativity. I'm saying, you get a lot of pain. You get a lot of suffering. Pain is mandatory. Suffering, I think, is kind of optional. But you get a lot of pain in life. But how much pleasure you get up to you. Pain is inflicted upon us often. It's an experience of the way we have a tendency to react to the stimulus of life. A lot of times it's painful. It's not what we wanted and it hurts. But we also have the ability to see how whatever it is we got, we can appreciate, we can like, we can find pleasure in virtually all experiences. We can certainly find a lot of pleasure in some of the experiences we have in life if we decide to make that choice. And one of the choices we can make is to take some time, cut out some time from our busy lives and do something like we're about to do right now, and that's take a few moments and slow everything down and put everything away and decide it's time now to do what we call an audio journey and help you find yourself in paradise. So it starts by letting yourself get real comfortable and feeling real safe and closing your eyes and taking that beginning step with one really deep, conscious deep breath. One really notice I'm taking a breath. And as you release that breath, the feeling of peace, the feeling of pleasure begins.
Yeah, experience things just sort of slowing down. Again, we like to repeat as often as possible that you don't need to slow down your thoughts or stop your thoughts in order to meditate. It happens automatically as you practice meditating or contemplating. No mystery here. It's just your eyes are closed. You take a few slow, deep breaths and then let your body sort of breathe itself. And then third, you tell yourself that you're really safe and that you feel in your body a letting go feeling, that you're relaxed. 1, 2, 3. Your eyes are closed. Your breathing is initially slow and deep and then natural. The breathing, the rhythm, the cadence of somebody who, number 3, feels very safe and very relaxed. And then we like to suggest that you imagine, if you wish, a kind of a paradise. It could be a beautiful garden that someone's put many, many hours into creating, or it could be a wilderness area, maybe a place in your mind's eye, in your imagination, that's never been explored by human beings before. a place so far away only you know about it. And you put yourself in this beautiful place of perfect peace now. And open all of your imaginary senses, allowing our voices to guide you. Hear the birds and the wind in the trees. And I'll bet with a little imagination, just allowing yourself to imagine smelling the fragrances of nature upon the warm, gentle breezes.
And now it's time to stop and take measure of just how much pleasure you let yourself feel from things that are imaginary and things that are real. So imagine sitting here in this peaceful place and this beautiful, timeless, wonderful space, and feel the pleasure of the temperature and the air upon your skin. Feel the temperature of this wonderful body you find yourself in. Feel the pleasure that comes from the fragrances that surround and from all the beautiful nature sound and from what you see and what you taste. Everything can bring pleasure. So allow yourself to let it in. Let your pleasure levels now begin to rise and rise. You're feeling more pleasure. And what's in store is even more. So allow yourself to let it in, to fill yourself, and then begin to store this pleasure for future use, whenever you desire. Lots of pleasure. Fill up and measure the pleasure by your desire, and aspire to being even more.
The feeling that you're pretending is exactly the right feeling. The feeling that you're dreaming it up is exactly right and true. You're practicing. This is a rehearsal so that you'll recognize the opportunities to experience pleasure more readily, more easily. For pleasure, like love itself, is, in fact, everywhere equally present. In every instant, believe it or not, there's an opportunity to detach mindfully, not dissociate, but mindfully take one breath and a step back, see the bigger picture, allow it to be what it is, get real, and accept the truth of it as a place to begin to plan your conscious response. Not reacting knee-jerk, but initiating a response that honors peace and happiness, pleasure, and love for everyone, for all concerned.
Allow yourself to feel the pleasure that this here and now can bring from the eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and skin, and the things that make life sing. You can find pleasure everywhere if you only take a look. You can find it in the past or the future or your imagination or a book. Lots of places, lots of cases, lots of pleasure to be found. It's everywhere. It's here and there. It's really all around. It's just a matter of taking time and allowing yourself to tune in. Because once you seek pleasure, finding pleasure will begin. So find it in the here and now, in the future, in the past. Find it in imagination, and wherever you go. At last, you'll see that pleasure is not only here, there, and everywhere, but it's free. So fill yourself with pleasure and tranquility.
Consider that you are not a container that at some point becomes filled with pleasure for yourself only, but a conduit, a medium, through which your pursuit of pleasure is happiness and love, peace of mind, is paid forward or passed on. Your job is not only to stand receptive, but to experience it fully and pass it on, for pleasure as love heals. Pleasure is a feeling of happiness and love moving through you, not merely into you, but from you as well. Be the conduit or pleasure moving through you, and then direct it, guide it. You determine consciously the direction to send your gratitude, your love, and your sense of pleasure, that others may feel filled and full and fulfilled, and a meaning and purpose can rise out of the pursuit of real happiness. Again, it's impossible for happiness and pleasure to be selfish and self-centered for long. It must grow, it must evolve, and sooner or later the higher self emerges, and you realize you could never experience real pleasure, happiness, or love alone. It's got to be shared. It's got to be shared. You got to pass it on. After all, it is everywhere equally present. Well, maybe it's less about moving through you than you moving through it. But don't hold on. The idea is to keep letting go, paying it forward, passing it on, and honoring the importance of relationship, one other, two others, three others, and more. Imagine the extra happiness, love, peace, and pleasure that'll come from being part of the ever-growing expansion of this experience that ultimately we have to call love as conscious awareness itself.
So it's been our pleasure to serve you, and hope that pleasure you'll see as something that is your birthright. You can pursue it easily. Accept that pleasure's everywhere. It's just out there to find. It's a matter of focusing inward or outward with your mind, but taking time. Find the pleasure. Without and within, take time to find the pleasure. And the pleasure will begin. So if it feels comfortable for you, find a place, a special sort of space inside of you that pleasure stores, and make sure that place is full so you can give it away some more. Because the more pleasure you feel, the more pleasure people will find that it's a pleasure being around you, because you're pleasurable and kind. So take a deep breath, and as it feels pleasurable to you, bring yourself back to wide awake.
I think a lot of people are going to benefit from this, because there are people that have a lot of fear and a lot of people that have a little bit of fear that too much pleasure is a bad thing. And I think we reframed it again. It would be a bad thing if it were only the separated self, without regard to the impact on other people that was experiencing the pleasure. Don't fall for that old 20th century argument. This is the 21st century. The new paradigm is and, not or. It's us, not just me. It's a growth process. It's a natural unfolding and evolution, and it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. It's just better and better, more and more all the time.
And the two greatest pleasures I've ever experienced are being in love and helping others. And those two things are, I think, two of life's greatest pleasures of all.
Thanks for listening. Be sure and forward these programs to your friends. You can do that any number of ways, but the easiest is to visit the site at focusedpassion.com. And right below the built-in player, when you first log in, is a gadget to help you do that simply and easily. It's a way that you can pay it forward, share what you care about, and target a particular program to someone that you know who'll really appreciate it and benefit from it.
And if you want to give even more, you can give a whole gift of a 6-month subscription to the upcoming shows for just $39. Anybody that you think would benefit from the continuous improvement that comes from not getting a show right now, but getting a weekly show every single week, someone in your life that you think would benefit from that, we put together this special 6-month subscription package as well.
You bet. So be gentle, love life, and take care of each other. For Steve Snyder, this is Michael Benner. Aloha from Maui.